So let's say that was in 2022. Instead of having the base year be this year, you would have to move the base year to that year. Well, if you've issued any debt, the underwriters are not going to let you do that. Okay, they've got a bond outstanding saying we have a claim on those revenues. They're not going to let you go in and say, oh, by the way, now we're going to start it 7 years later. Let's say that's not how it works, because their bond purchasers have only one recourse, and that's the money that's collected in that special fund. So they watch that special fund real careful. They want to make sure you're not making changes that would undermine the ability to repay any potential investors in that area. So you can amendment, but reality is it wouldn't be amended.
Our obligation then is to get it right the first time.
Yeah, it's very hard to amend. It's very difficult. We've done it in Gwinnett. We did 2 of them in Gwinnett. Basically, they had not issued any debt. They didn't have anything outstanding. They were actually in what's called a decrement, where values are going lower than when they originally created the district. So in that sense, bringing it up to this year didn't hurt them, it actually helped them. So in that case, they did it. But it's very unusual. It's not in any way the typical process.
Then I know you want to get it exactly right, but obviously you're looking forward and you're trying to predict where there's going to be interest. And
yeah.
So I guess, is there some then incentive to err on the side of being more inclusive than less inclusive?
If you think about it, it's 2 simple things are governing this. One is you have a cap of 10%. So if you didn't have the cap of 10%, you'd probably say, hey, we'll just include a whole lot of the city in TAD and hope we guess right. We don't know where the right areas are, we'll kind of guess. But the state says, no, you can't have more than 10%. So that's sort of the control mechanism. On the other hand, when you're looking at areas where you're trying to foster new development to come, is it the right side of the street or the left side of the street? Is it the north block or the south block? You probably don't know, because it depends on a given developer in a year or 2 to come in with a plan. So the logic is, we're doing an intersection, let's put it all in there, because we don't know whether it's going to be on the north side, the left side. So try to be inclusive, but you're being inclusive within the guideline that we can't get to a place where we have more than 10% included. So it's kind of the yin and yang of how you figure out the boundaries. You know, if you're doing something, the other rule is you can't spend money outside the boundary. So if you were doing a streetscape project and you wanted to go up 3rd Street with your streetscape project, you have to include both sides of the street. Otherwise, you can only do the left side, you couldn't do the right side. So you have to think about not only where you're going to generate the money, but if I wanted to spend it on a public good in that area. There's actually a case in Gainesville. They didn't include it, and they built a bridge, a pedestrian bridge. They could only use the TAD money to fund the bridge part that was on the west side. They had to use other city money on the east side to finish the bridge, because the law went down the middle of the street. It said the boundary is the middle of the street. So those are just boundary things that you really got to pay attention to when you create the boundary. But generally, you try to be inclusive if you can. You try to include parcels that you think have a reason to change. That's what you're trying to define.
Who else is up? And also, just to show of hands, let's see, we've got Councilor Woodson, Councilor Davis, and Councilor Huff. And then we do have 2 people who want to speak.
Yeah, I think we'll answer a lot of these questions in this presentation. So I would suggest that.
Well, understanding that,
I'm glad to answer any questions.
Okay, we'll let the councilors know that you probably have your questions answered in the presentations, but we'll go ahead with Councilor Woodson if they want to hold their questions. Fine.
Judy just answered one, so I'm going to the second one. I want to just clarify this in my mind. Let's say the Fort Benning proposal that's coming, that area.
Yes.
I looked at the boundaries this morning, you know, what was drawn for the proposal of it. Let's say, for an example, that the school, that we talked here, and let's say before we approve it, let's say the school system would like to add the Casita Row area. Would they have to add that before we vote, or can they do that after we vote?
Good question. You can amend the plan. Probably the logic would be that they would recommend that change. Then you would go back and amend the plan. We'd have a formal amendment. If we know enough in advance, we'll go ahead and put it in before you adopt it. That's the preferred way. If something comes up from the concurrence process at the end, you've already adopted it, you can go back and just have an amendment that says we're also adding blocks A, B, and C in, and you have to have a hearing, but you can have an amendment to do that. So it'd be better if you knew in advance, and then you you
So-
kind of folded it in while you're having the discussion.
So in saying that is, let's say we approve these district areas, because that's the only thing we're talking about,
Right.
the boundaries. We can always come back and amend them, but we cannot, it's just a matter of words
No,
that
kind of
we
my
use?
earlier discussion, if you're going to do it, you do it right as you're forming it.
Okay.
If you come back, let's say you approve the betting TAD for the end of the year, and in April, somebody came forward and said, oh, we forgot the gas station on the corner, XYZ, we want to put that in there. At that point, if your decision, the council's decision was, yes, we want to include that in there, we would have to reset the tax base for next year. Okay, we wouldn't be able to use the base from this current year, because you would have made an amendment in 2016, and all tax base has to go to the year that the amendment is approved. So anytime you make an amendment, usually if it's going to happen, it happens right during the adoption. As part of the adoption process, you go through those changes to get to the final map. We did that in City of Lawrenceville.
Okay. Since I know that you're very involved in this, these proposals that are going to be, well, we had one presented, the River District, but today we're going to be presented with another one. Are these being presented to the school board also before we
Yes.
have our public hearings so that they can have their input?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank
We
you.
have Counselor Davis and
We're going to
Counselor
brief
Huff.
them on the 16th. I haven't
On the
coming down
16th.
16th.
And the only reason I asked is because, like Judy, you had said last week, sometimes things go on in the district and you don't even know about it till you get here. And that was the same thing that happened to me this morning. So I went back to look, and then I saw the district that's being drawn, and my first thought was that because of the redevelopment that's going on and the school system is doing on the Casita Road, that was my first question to staff when I saw it. I said, whoa, what about this? So staff said, hey, that's a good question for you to ask them. And that's why I brought that up, because of the, the development they're doing and the tightness that they have in the school. And in saying that, let me ask you something. On the ones that we already, or the ones that we're looking at adopting, if there are schools there now, it would be to the school board's beneficial to agree, ain't it? Because of the
I don't want to
development?
presume what the school board's decision would be.
No, I'm just saying,
The
wouldn't
logic
it?
is, if they either have an existing school around in the TAD, it can improve the area around their schools, which is a positive thing, most school districts. Some cases, we've had the school districts have made actual requests for funding. We had a case in Marietta where they wanted to expand the playground of the school. It was an urban school and they didn't have a lot of ground. And they said, well, could we get a TAD funding to help us expand the school? And that was part of the decision process. We've had other cases where the school districts, for whatever reason, wanted to opt out, didn't want their properties included. It doesn't affect the TAD plus or minus, so we opted them out. So again, I don't want to presume what
Right,
the
no,
school
and I
board's
didn't
going
want
to say.
you-
It's really their call. It's really what they want to do.
Right.
But there is some value to it, I think.
Yeah, and I didn't want you to say yes, what they're going to do
Yeah.
or not. I just wanted to clearly in my mind, as I understand the TADs and go through the study, that can happen.
Yes.
And so that was my only reason asking, and because of that question when I saw the outline and the one that we're going to
And
present.
give you another
today.
example, in Atlanta, they had a surplus school. They wanted it in the TAD because they wanted to offer the TAD as a potential way to convert the school to another use. So they were totally on board, said, hey, this is a good thing. So
Okay.
it really just depends on circumstance.
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll go to Counselor Davis and then Counselor Huff.
Mr. Bleakley, I want to thank you personally for spending time with me on the phone and
Glad to.
reserving your time for all of us, but you did take time out of your busy schedule to help me work through this, and that's much appreciated. So I did want to say that. You talked about, I want to go back, I've got 3 questions here real quick. You talked about the terms earlier. Now, you talked about as a max term, and the max term on this allowed by the state is 30 or 30?
You do
30 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm reading in here that in the procedures and policies, it states something about limited to 25. I'm not sure on that yet. But what is the minimum term allowed by state?
I guess you could be a year. You could
So
theoretically.
you can go a
I
year,
don't think anything would
5,
happen, but
10,
you could do it,
15,
yeah.
20, up to
Yeah,
Up to 25, 30, up to 30?
yeah, 30, 25 or 30 is the typical term.
Now, I think we might have discussed this, but I'm just thinking out loud here. I would assume that that works the same way that the concern there would be on the financing part,
Yes,
with the bond underwriters, that it would be just like amortizing.
correct. They want to be able to amortize it over a long period if they
Right.
can.
Depending on how much you borrow. So if you borrow for a shorter period of term, I would assume that the bond underwriters would probably request a higher interest rate.
The interest rate could actually maybe be better because you're going to pay it off faster.
Right.
The problem you're going to have is in TADs, you gradually build up your revenue over the first couple of years.
Right.
Because if you think about it, if you approve a TAD, project gets built, the taxes on that project don't get collected till the following year.
Right.
So you really have about a 2-year delay before the revenue shows up. So if you're on a really short ramp-up period, you're just going to kind of hit your momentum and you basically end the district. So it
Well,
gives you the
your-
ability to have more financial
Right,
flexibility.
well, your ability of what you're being able to
That's
collect
right.
and then pay off the bonds. Now, each of these, my understanding is each of these districts, before I was a little confused on this, but there's 4, I guess, that we're going to talk about in a little while.
Yes,
They're all separate districts,
correct.
and they're all voted on separately.
You're being asked to vote on 3 in the River District in one package, and the Benning is a separate standalone.
It's one package, but by law, are we supposed to approve?
You're going to approve all 3, yes, that'd be correct.
Individually.
That'd be correct.
Now, this is important.
Wait, let's say that again, make sure that,
In the resolution, you would approve districts 1, 2, and 3. If you've approved the River District, it would approve, that's how you would approve it. You
4.
approve them. And 4 would be as its own sort of standalone. Yeah. I'm sorry, sir? That's the current package. That's current town how it's
so we
proposed.
couldn't say we approved 1 and 3, but not 2.
You ultimately can make any decision you want to make. That's up to you as a council to make that decision.
So wait,
This is clear as mud.
all right, wait a minute,
Oh,
hold on.
no, we're proposing it to you as a package of 3 TADs in one district.
I can't help you.
But
Mr.
that's
City Manager.
up to you to make the decision if you want to proceed that way or not.
You want to clarify?
So,
I think as Ken has indicated, the way it's presented as a riverfront
District.
district, it's all 3. But if council decided that you want to vote on them separately, then they could be resubmitted as a district. I think Flournoy is 1, and then the others 2, 3, and 4. You could vote on them individually, but that's not how it's presented at this time. I hope that cleared up the mud.
it's just a decision. Okay, we had, Counselor Davis had the floor.
I think the city manager is confused. You're confusing me now because I just thought it said that you have to vote on each individually.
I'm simply saying.
But as a package.
The way it's presented by them, it's a package.
It's a
But
package.
if you as a counselor says, no, I want them to come to me individually,
Right.
so that I can vote on them individually, then you have the prerogative to do that, and you can.
I thought my understanding was by law you vote on them individually even though they're part of a package. And I'll tell you why I asked that. The next is if it's 3 districts in one,
Right.
what does the law say about funds? Can you commingle funds?
No,
Or can you
only the funds, every district is its own separate account.
Okay.
You can't spend money in 1 and 2 or 3 and 4. Other states allow that. Georgia does not permit that. That every TAD district, any funds generated, say in District 1, can only be spent in District 1.
And that's important. I think everybody needs to
Yeah.
understand that.
No
because
commingling.
Only the funds generated in those districts can be used on projects in those
In
areas.
those districts, that's right.
Whether it's the Liberty, whether it's the
Any of them.
Fort Benning, whether it's City Village, whether it's
That's correct.
Uptown, only in their respective district. they
You'll
can
have
use
a
those
bank
funds.
fund for each TAD. That fund is
Correct.
only for expenditures in that TAD district.
And
And-
Counselor Woodson, Counselor Davis just said it, I think, very well. It's basically this River District thing as a political package to, I think, I'll let them speak for themselves, but to try and show cohesiveness of a region.
Well,
But that doesn't bind council's hands.
No.
Because they want to present it
That's
as a
fine.
cohesive district. Yeah.
You're right. We understand that. That's okay. I'm just wanting everybody to understand how the money will be allotted. And from that aspect, I do, since we're talking about districts, and we're talking about the lines and what potentially as we're making progress. I do want to say today that I do have some concerns about city land and manufacturing in one district, or, well, actually, it's just in one district. So I do want to discuss that with a possible amendment in that area at some point in time, Mayor. But I think
I'm
that...
not sure I understand. Oh, now, one more time, just real, it's about city land? You're concerned about city land and what?
I do have, well, number one, I think everybody needs to understand how that works, whether it's private land, city land, or nonprofit land. I think everybody needs to understand how that works. All right, but in this case, I just wanted to put out on the table before we get, as we're progressing, to get comfortable in this thing, I want to talk about amending a district, and it has to do with city land and it has to do with manufacturing.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Is there a difference about city land, nonprofit land, and private land? I guess nonprofit land and city land wouldn't be adding to the increment unless it was transferred. Sorry.
Any land owned by a nonprofit institution, a government entity, or like the city would be is tax exempt, and it goes into the district at a zero value. Now, how that land's used in the future, or whether it's the right piece to include, that's totally your purview to decide. But it doesn't, from a financial point of view, it goes into the zero
So
because
it's
it's
just a
tax
matter of
exempt.
whether or not, it's like that school district example you gave, if there's an abandoned school building,
Right.
or if there's an empty city lot in City Village or something, you might want to put it in because it may encourage a developer.
Yeah,
It
if the
doesn't
city
add
had,
things.
Brunswick had surplus property that they were storing their trash trucks on, they want to include that in the district to hopefully attract a developer. That was basically, they made the decision to include that. So, yeah, it's really your policy.
Well, Mayor, what I wanted to, in city land, the way I understand it, what will happen if the city sells a piece of land, that the law says that there's a responsibility to debt service. Only debt service, I think it's 10%, I'm not sure what that amount is. It's a millage, 1 mil, but it goes to debt service, that the city has total debt service. That's all. The rest of the money from the sale purchase, there will be no property tax proceeds to the city. It all goes into the TAD pot. Now, with a nonprofit, it's my understanding that 100%, if that land's sold back to a private entity, 100% of that tax revenue goes back into the TAD, that the city will not receive any benefit on that. So that's my understanding.
I don't understand, that would be for the finance director. If the city sells land to a private investor, let's say,
Yeah.
that would just all come back on the tax rolls at that point. I don't understand
The
the
land-
reserve of a millage. What's that about? Could somebody clarify that for me? Because we sell land all the time. I mean, not all the time, but we sell land.
Well, we
Not
sell
in-
land.
well, we're
Yeah.
talking about
You know,
TAD now.
we
We're in
declared,
TAD now.
we,
It reserves, so he's saying that when there's a TAD and
we
you
declare so.
sell city land in a TAD, it reserves a millage somehow. What do you know about that?
My understanding would be that when the digest is set in the TAD, that it's taxable digest. It's not total digest. It's just the taxable digest. So if there's a piece of city property within that TAD, it reflects on the taxable digest as zero because it's tax exempt. So when that property is sold to a private entity, it would go onto the tax roll as a taxable property, so that would increase that digest.
Well, that legally, I don't think that's the way I understand it, so it's
Okay,
good
what
we're having
is
this
he talking
conversation.
about with there being millage reserved? I don't understand that.
Let me say this again,
Yeah. Wait, hold on a second.
and I think the city attorney's office might want to comment on that for clarification. If the city has a piece of land in a TAD, if it's in a TAD district, and it's sold, the law requires that there has to be a certain percentage of any addition to the tax digest of any revenue goes to the payoff of debt service. But the remaining,
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
yes, the
The tax
remaining amount
allocation
of tax
district
proceeds
only
goes into
freezes the
TAD.
portion of the ad valorem tax that deals with M&O, deals with non-debt service. We do not get the portion of the millage that is for debt service. So let's say that project went on the tax rolls, your total mills or whatever the total is, a percent of that is for debt service. That does not go in the TAD. That
Right.
remains in the city coffers.
But-
You're only pledging what's called the M&O portion of your millage rate. So that way your debt, any debt that the city has outstanding,
Right.
that you're anticipating making payments on already,
Correct.
we do not have access to that portion of the millage. That portion
Right, you're right there.
flows to
Now,
the city.
The other
That's
half
correct.
of it is any tax benefit generated
Goes into the.
from that, whatever happens on that property
Goes into the TAD.
100% goes into the TAD.
Well, yeah,
outside of the debt
that's-
service.
Yeah, but you got to remember, the way you look at TADs is it's not about the property, it's about the district. Because the money we're committed to is what the district generates.
I understand.
But you're correct. If,
I
let's say,
understand.
nothing else changed, and the only thing changed was that parcel became taxable, then that money would go into the.
Now, with a nonprofit, what I was saying, Madam Mayor, was that there's no debt service to be applied. So 100% of whatever the tax benefits that are collected after, here and after, go into the TAD district.
Only the M&O portion. The rest of your debt service portion would actually go to repay debt.
What do you mean the M&O?
If you look at your millage rate, most of your millage is for the maintenance and operation budget, and then you've reserved a part of your millage for debt service. We have no claim on that millage that goes to debt service. I don't know exactly what the,
So that stays the same whether it's
So-
transferred or not?
So for District 1, the millage rate is 17.90. 0.82 of that millage rate is for debt service. So any ad valorem collected for that 0.82 mills would continue to go into debt service. It would be the 17.18 mills that's collected above an aggregate of the total of the digest for the TAD would go into the TAD district.
Okay, so we would be assured we would still have the revenue we needed to meet our debt service.
You don't get access to
For
that.
that property.
That's
For those
for all
properties.
properties.
So we wouldn't find ourselves not able to service our debt because of a TAD situation?
The-
Okay, so it's sort of a safety valve for the
Yes.
existing
we
debt?
cannot claim any of your
Debt
debt
service
service.
millage.
Okay, got it, all right. Okey-doke, where were we? I think.
Hey, Glenn, that's a follow-up to that. What
Okay.
about paving fund and medical center?
Well,
Okay.
I don't know about that, but the only reason I brought that up is because that touches the concern of what I talked about amending one district. And I think it's appropriate, but we can have that conversation later. I don't know, you might want to ask that question.
Okay, yeah.
It was
go
just to expand it, like we have a medical center millage, how does that go? Or,
The medical
we have a
center is
paving,
part of
sewer, paving?
the 17.18, but again, you're looking
Oh, it
at.
is? Okay.
Mhm. You're
And,
looking at the tax digest in aggregate for that TAD district. So if you had, for example, let's just say 10 million in that taxable district, and there was a decline, and you went to 9.5 million, there would be no incremental over the 10 million. So it's only the incremental over the 10 million in total of the digest that goes into the TAD district.
Right, but unlike the debt service, there are no other pieces that are apportioned out for special allocation.
That's right,
Yeah.
just the debt service
Just the debt
remains in
service.
place.
Gotcha.
Councilor Huff.
Mr. Bleakley, excuse me. In the TAD, the forming of the TAD, we form the TAD, we come up with our projects or whatever, then we build it out. Once we have debt paid off, if it's a situation you spoke of earlier, build out is at not 100%, but it's at maximum. And in order to close that TAD, you're saying that all debt service has to be paid in full, and then that's
Yeah, if you have any outstanding obligations, you need to pay those. You cannot walk away from those obligations, obviously, because you've got to trust to the bond purchasers or the bank who made the loan on that. But what typically happens is you might have $4 million in your bank account, say in the 15th year, and your debt obligations are $1.5 million. Well, what you can do is say, let's reserve enough to pay the bank loan off over 10 years or 5 years and close the tab, not issue any other debt. We have enough reserve to basically pay the loan off. Now, a lot of the bonds have a call requirement. You can't call them less than 10 years. You got to at least pay them for 10 years, then you call the bond. You can actually, in some cases, prepay the bonds. You can actually go in and say in the 15th year, we've built up enough reserve, we're going to go ahead and pay the bonds off. They don't like that. They rather have you pay each year, but
Right.
you often have provision to do that. So you only get a situation, say, out in the 15th year, somewhere around there, where in most TAD you'll have built up a big surplus. You'll have that surplus, and you can decide, do we want to do any more TAD? Do we want to stop? Obviously, you have to pay your obligations. You can't walk away from those, but often you have surplus beyond that. So at that point, you could say, okay, let's shut things down, reserve what we need for the bond, and we'll pay ourselves and the school board back and basically end the debt. So we just did, East Point just refinanced the Camp Creek Marketplace. It's the 12th year. They basically went back out and shortened the repayment period. They had another 9 years to go. They've shortened the repayment period. They upped the amount they were going to pay, and basically are going to burn it off more quickly. Went out and refinanced, got a much better interest rate, because they have 12 years of experience paying the bond. So when they did that deal, it was at the height of the 9/11 period. They went back out now, got a much better rate, and basically are going to burn off the last few years of that. There's no additional financing, and then the school board and the city will get all the, school board, the city, and Fulton County will get all the revenue for that. So that was about year 12.
And what district is this you're talking?
East Point, city of East Point.
Oh, yeah.
The Camp Creek Marketplace. Basically, Camp Creek Marketplace was pro forma to do about $60 million. They're doing $98 million.
Wow.
So they are way beyond where they thought they would be. So they're able to basically close it out early because the values have been much higher than were forecast back at the planning period.
Interesting.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, let's hear from our folks. I think we had Mr. Tom Flournoy is first, and he wants to speak about the proposed Benning Tech Park TAD. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council. I'm not here to talk about billboards or overlays for a change. I'm Tom Flournoy, President of Flournoy Development Company. In collaboration with Columbus State University and the Development Authority, we began working on the Benning Tech Park in various forms since 2009. At first, it was supposed to be a simulated maneuver battle lab that the Army had $31 million to build, and we were going to work with CSU, build a facility on this property, and have the Army work there. CSU would have classrooms, and it would be great interaction. Somebody in the Army up in Washington, D.C. decided they didn't like the idea. So we continued on, and what we want to do is do the Benning Tech Park, which I'll show you a DVD in a minute, which is several years old. You'll see it, but this was originally our concept to bring in military contractors who were at Fort Benning. We're all aware of the change in the role of Fort Benning, potentially because of sequestration and BRAC. We don't know really what's going to happen there. Nobody really does yet. Certainly, we're not able to. But what we know is Benning Tech Park has 170 acres, located in a great location, right there on 185 and Carter Z. Tremendous traffic, great visibility. And we want it to be a catalyst in helping South Columbus grow. We think it can be. Currently, the land is not zoned, so whatever happens there, I think there was a question earlier, maybe Ms. Tom, it may have been yours, but we would have to zone that to whatever we come up with a final plan. Our goal with the TAD is really to help us have a huge arrow in our quiver. What we think could happen at Benning Tech Park could be CSU could have a campus there to work with soldiers. Office, it could be retail, it could be hospitality, tech incubators, restaurants, all of that. And we kind of changed our vision from where we originally started, thinking this would just be a hub for military contractors. The access is going to be greatly improved over time. So I think all those things really help us. We want to get this TAD approved and be able to help us provide the great infrastructure, a superior infrastructure with great signage, landscaping, lighting, being able to help attract companies into this location. We want to have every bit of honey we can put on this piece of toast. And we think that when we do this infrastructure and the technology and the high-speed internet will help us find first-class developers who want to join with us. We'll provide the amenities, and this will become a complement to the fantastic entrance that Fort Benning has to it right now. So that's really our goal in doing doing the TAD for the Benning Tech Park. I don't know who's got the DVD if you want to roll that, and then I think Ken can answer any further questions and details of that. Obviously, he's the guru of the TADs. Thank you.
Benning Technology Park is the ultimate workplace solution for military contractors and consultants desiring close proximity to Fort Benning and the Maneuver Center. A secure office environment located adjacent to Interstate 185 on the north side of Fort Benning, Georgia. Interstate highways offer convenient access to major cities around the southeast, in addition to 2 international airports in Atlanta and Birmingham. Local air transportation includes the Columbus Airport and Lawson Field at Fort Benning. Numerous colleges and universities are located within a 100-mile radius. Columbus State University, an affiliate of the University System of Georgia, is conveniently located in central Columbus. Columbus Technical College, Troy University, and Chattahoochee Valley Community College also provide local educational opportunities. Nationally recognized PhD programs are offered at Auburn University, Georgia Tech, Emory, Georgia State, and the University of Alabama at Birmingham. These educational institutions provide abundant manpower to private local employers such as Aflac World Headquarters, Synovus Financial, Total Systems Services, Pratt & Whitney, as well as W.C. Bradley Company. Fort Benning is a self-sustaining military community which currently supports more than 120,000 active duty military, family members, reserve component soldiers, retirees, and civilian employees on a daily basis. The convergence of several Department of Defense base realignment and closure initiatives at Fort Benning is bringing unprecedented growth of an estimated 28,000 people to the Chattahoochee Valley region with the BRAC mandated deadline of September 2011. For any company that needs immediate exposure to Benning personnel and the clear access advantage to the post, Benning Technology Park presents an outstanding opportunity. Located just inside the main security gate, Benning Technology Park is within a 10-mile radius of all major Army headquarters. Sand Hill is the home of the 198th Infantry Brigade, which conducts Infantry 1 Station Unit training, as well as the 192nd Infantry Brigade, that conducts basic training. Harmony Church area holds the 2nd Battalion of the 29th Infantry Regiment Sniper School, the 1st Battalion of the 29th Infantry Regiment, which provides training support for Bradley fighting vehicles and Strykers, the Fort Benning phase of Ranger School, and the Armor School's 194th Armored Regiment. Kelly Hill houses the 3rd Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division Mechanized. Main Post contains the 16th Cavalry Regiment that conducts training courses for armor, as well as the 199th Infantry Brigade, overseeing the infantry officer and enlisted courses, Airborne School, Officer Candidate School, and the Non-Commissioned Officers Academy. The 197th Infantry Regiment oversees the battalions of the 29th Infantry. Also at Main Post, you have the 11th Engineer Battalion, Combat, 13th Combat Sustainment Support Battalion, 14th Combat Support Hospital, 17th Air Support Operations Squadron, and the 75th Ranger Regiment. Tenants of Benning Technology Park will enjoy sophisticated communications and data infrastructure within an attractive campus setting. All building designs will be environmentally sound and ecologically sensitive, with the goal of attaining LEED Silver certification from the U.S. Green Building Council. The site is situated on 174 acres. 80 acres of which will be developed to feature office, R&D, and educational facilities. A truly unique environment dedicated to the transfer of technology from the laboratory to the marketplace, with the communications infrastructure to meet today's bandwidth constraints and information security challenges. The park has been master planned to support various types of tenants with build-to-suit options provided by our in-house construction management capabilities. Occupants will range from large corporations to smaller support-oriented companies that are integrated into complementary spaces. Larger corporations may require specialized facilities that can be custom designed and constructed to accommodate specific needs. Multiple tenant buildings will include amenity suites designed to enhance efficiency with conferencing, training, teleconferencing, and storage capabilities. Built to contractor specifications, larger capacity buildings will be designed with expansion in mind. Benning Technology Park offers the location advantage in support of your corporate mission to closely understand and better serve those who defend our nation.
All right. We've got, let's see, who all wants to be heard? Councilor Huff.
I just wanted to personally say thank you for putting up with me and my erratic schedule for us trying to sit and meet. And we had a good meeting. My question to you is based on what I was shown and what I saw this morning, and everything builds out. I keep talking about building out the TAD. I'm still interested in the parameters, that if it's a success, the other pieces of the area that you showed me that could spur development. Would that be something that would just spur development on its own, or would we have to come back and add to the TAD later?
We've got, I think it's 280 acres in the TAD. In other words, we have the bigger redevelopment area.
Okay.
And then the TAD is actually 280 acres. Benning Tech Park is 174 of that 280. And we specifically, actually, I forgot who asked the question about the school board. We did, in fact, or Ken Bleakley's group went and talked to them about the area that was to be included, and they said, you know, the school board said, we'd like for our schools, this area, to be in there. They elected to put their schools in the district. And so I think, as I understand it, Ken, we have the TAD. That's what's being, have the redevelopment district first, and then we have a specific smaller area that's the TAD. And the TAD is being approved here. If somebody else wants to come in later and do a separate TAD, and it's in this redevelopment, it's already built, and you just come and approve the TAD that drops into that.
The project.
The
Yeah,
project,
I think, because we use these terms interchangeably and everybody gets confused, but I think what you just said is that there's a district that you're asking council to approve, and there's an area that you already have in your mind a specific concept for.
It's been submitted in the draft.
Right, and then what you're saying in response to Council Huff is that somebody could then come in and do some other projects within that TAD, right? Or outside it. Which were you referring to?
Well, they're both. In other words, we have a TAD, somebody could come in and do a project outside the specific boundaries of Benning Tech Park, but inside the Benning Tech Park TAD. Or else you could come outside, as long as it's in the bigger the development district, and somebody could do a separate TAD that we didn't have any part of. But it's in that development district, and they manage their own deal. They present it to council.
Okay. Well,
We're setting it up for future growth in the area.
Yeah. Based on my research and what we've talked about a TAD coming in and creating interest and development in an area that has really zero going on. It looks good from what I've seen to try to get something going in that area to get investment, economic development, because the area has a lot of available properties for a lot of people. So if we do some of the things we're looking at now and proceed on with some of the plans we have for T-Splosh, I think we may have something really working well for this particular one. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I would think too, Tom and Ken, and I guess, does somebody else have, I guess Councilor Thompson, Councilor Woodson. But part of the object, I mean, is not to put everything in a TAD. Eventually, don't you want to create a TAD, and then it gets to be such a hot spot because there's all this investment going on that the areas around the TAD start getting development too, and those increments are not limited, and all of that's coming into the city and coming into the school board. So the two reasons why you would want to have a TAD if you were a city or a school board is because, one, even though the increment, you will not get the benefit of the increment while the TAD district is in existence, you will get all the benefit from the sales tax receipt that's going on if there is a vibrancy there. And all those areas outside the TAD boundaries that start become hot areas for investment and growth, you reap the benefit of that increment. And so those are the two things that you could actually see an increase to, I think, Councilor Henderson and Councilor Baker's concern before, which I share, is you've got to balance how likely it is that you're going to get this great vibrancy going on and what potentiality there is for growth outside the district that you would reap immediate benefit from and sales tax benefit from. But anyway, Councilor Thomas and Councilor Woodson.
At what point are we going to get a map?
Not a second.
Well, I think Mr. Blakely is going to present behind him, and he has a map for you. Is that right? Okay.
Do you have a copy for me?
No.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd ask that they bring enough copies for all of you. And so Mr. Bishop, as he comes with Liberty and Six and City Village, they should all have copies for city council members. So
It would be helpful, as we're talking about this, to have a map of the area that we're talking about.
well, and I shared that with him in advance, so that's why I know that he should have copies. And
Well,
he says he does.
I still don't have a
Yeah, if
copy.
somebody would hand them out as soon as you can. And let's see, we got Councilor Woodson, Councilor Huff. Okay, wait, all right. Councilor Huff, all right. Yes, Councilor
You
Huff.
are or me? Okay.
Can we get a mic on Councilor Huff, please?
Yeah, I just want to assure my partner over here. I've talked with my partner a couple of times, and I spoke with some people last week. So I have informed everyone and everything that I do to please contact Councilor Thomas and Councilor Henderson and keep them informed in the loop. Thank you.
All right.
Councilor Thomas, don't feel bad. That happens. Wanted to, Mr. Fona, did you bring copies for all of us to see yours?
I did not. I brought them for the school board, for some of the school people, because we had a 12 o'clock meeting. I thought we'd be there.
That's okay. Is the one, let me ask you something.
Do you have them?
Is the one that I saw that Rick...
Pull it up for you.
Okay, the one that Rick Jones had, is that it, but not the extension of the school portion yet?
Here it is.
If you look at the chart on the map on the chart, the red line reflects the proposed Benning Tech Park redevelopment area, outlined in red on the chart, and the blue would be the boundaries of the Benning Tech Park TAD. So it's within the bigger red outlined area, and that outlined area includes properties that the school district would like to see included, and also has the potential, as Tom mentioned, in the future, if you wanted to include a second TAD in that area, you've already got a redevelopment plan that has adopted that as an eligible area. So the Banning Tech Park portion, I have a laser? I don't know how this works. Anyway, Banning Tech Park portion is sort of the half-moon shaped piece of the property down right along the interchange with 85. And then north of that property, as Tom mentioned, there's a total of about 270 acres in the tax allocation district, and the project itself is about 170. So there's about 100 acres in addition to the Banning Tech Park piece. And then the red outline, there's an additional several hundred acres of property along Caseta, basically in those intersections. And it also is designed to capture where you're making improvements on I-185 interchange that's planned as part of your SPLOST activity. That's why the properties to the north are basically included in that property. If I go to the next slide, you
Wait,
can
before you move, please.
just to see the Banning piece a little closer, but sure, go ahead.
The redevelopment area is the one that we saw on the video? That was proposed?
That would actually
No.
be in the, sort of the banana-shaped piece of property.
Okay, so
in
that would be in the
southeast
blue
side.
area.
The
That's
green,
correct. That's
the green
Tech Park.
piece on the video is the one that looks like a banana. It's on the
Right.
bottom right.
Okay.
You can see it clear
Yeah,
here.
show him how to
That
draw
piece.
on it, please. And also, why would you not do the whole redevelopment district as a TAD? Or is it just because this is what you have?
That's Mayor. You and Judy are just stealing my show.
We've got to be careful about eating up the 10%.
Oh, I see, okay.
You know, we can't just give it all to one.
Okay, I see.
Now, in the blue portion,
Yes.
right, which is the TAD allocation, in that portion is what Mr. Flournoy was talking of potential.
Correct.
It wouldn't be the presentation he exactly made because of the status of Fort Benning, but that's where the commercial, the housing, the residential can go into, correct?
He's showing that is where the 180 acres of the
Okay.
video you saw, which is called Banning Tech Park.
Okay.
That is the boundary of Banning
That would
Tech
be-
Park,
okay.
which would be redeveloped as an office research campus as part of this plan. It's 180 acres of roughly about 280 acres in the TAD. So there's another 100 acres to the north in that blue line, roughly in that.
That's available for someone
That's correct.
else to
And
come
that's
in.
right where that intersection, the new improvements are being made at that exit at Caseta and 185. So it's kind of that area right around that area.
And so with meeting with the school system,
Yes.
then that blue line will extend over?
The
To
school
cover
system
Spencer High
indicated
School?
to us they have property further up Caseta that they were interested in having in the redevelopment area, but they're not at a point where they're ready to go ahead and do anything yet. So they said if we could be in the redevelopment area and then potentially benefit from a TAD in the future, they thought that made the most sense.
So in
it's
saying-
kind of where the property, right where it says Caseta, it's basically this area right here.
Okay.
And you'll also
And I
notice.
excuse my finger, that's not fair.
You'll also notice Spencer is in there that they wanted included too, in case they perhaps sell that property and there's a need to redevelop it. You have the ability to create a TAD for the Spencer High site TAD, excuse me?
Down there,
Yeah.
I just circled that
just
down
circle
there.
it, down the bottom.
Right down there. It sort of goes right down and encapsulate that site at their request.
So when you bring it back, would that all be included, or we're going to see what you saw, what you showed us today? The blue one?
Our focus is on the blue area.
Okay.
If you look at the blue area, which is kind of highlighted here, oh, now we got red.
I forgot.
Ignore the red, please. That blue area is the outline of the TAD. And so that would be the area that you would be committing the tax base. That's the 280 acres. Somebody had asked the question earlier, aren't we freezing the base early and we're losing our gain on that amount? The total taxable value in that blue area is $2.5 million. So you're probably, if you get a 2% increase on that, that's $40,000, right? Something like that. So it really is a very small part of the city's tax digest.
Okay.
Again, a Charles TAD, but wonder why you don't include, Mayor Pro Tem just asked me, why don't you just go ahead and include the old Spencer and the new Spencer site?
Because it take more from my digest.
It's just a digest.
But
It's kind
they're all,
of, if
but
that's
they're
the-
all zero right
If
now.
that's the
because they're all-
council's wish, we could do that. It
It's
adds-
just a question. It's y'all's ballgame, but the Mayor Pro Tem asked why we wouldn't include those, and they are zero value because
properties are, that's right.
because they're government properties. So it wouldn't affect the tax digest at all to include those properties. But anyway, it's just for school, for thought. Maybe the school board has a reason why they wouldn't want it.
And that was the reason, when I look at it, that was the reason I was thinking, because of that, the school system, the Spencer, the old Spencer and the new Spencer, but then I was told, well, be careful because of the digest. But then, again, it's at 0%,
Shouldn't.
so it really wouldn't affect it anyway.
Yeah, I don't know why you would exclude them, but that's y'all's call. And the other question I had from Councilor Davis, actually, let me see if I can get this right. Once you create a TAD, and for instance, we just were approved for opportunity districts, opportunity zones, we have military zones, all that kind of stuff, and enterprise zones. So let's say we created a TAD on something that had nothing there right now. Could we then use opportunity zones on top of it? Could we use enterprise zones on top of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Two caveats to that. Opportunity zone focuses on tax credits that go to the employer. So you get a $3,500 tax credit for 5 years. That is totally independent of the TAD. You can go ahead and create those. They can overlap. They can not overlap. In an enterprise zone, you're getting a tax break. You're getting that employer tax break, but you can also give a tax abatement on the property. What most cities do is say, if we're going to put it, let's say we created a TAD, if we're going to put an enterprise zone in a TAD, we're not going to offer the tax abatement portion, just the job credits. Although actually in the state of Atlanta, there are examples where there are little holes in the TAD where they had existing enterprise zones. They just drew the circle around them, said let them burn off. So, probably as a policy, you want to go either or in a TAD district. Say we're going to do an enterprise zone, we're probably just going to limit it to the job credits. So you just don't get, it's just one less complexity. But overall opportunity zones, absolutely, you can create those. There's no, in fact, the opportunity zone program looks at it favorably if it's in the TAD because it's evidence that you've made other commitments to the area to make that area turn around. They actually look at it as a positive.
Who else is up? Because remember, I can't see. So, Barnes.
Can I suggest that, could we have like 5 minutes to just kind of walk through this? I think
Oh, sure.
we'll answer
Okay.
a lot of questions and then totally open it up to any questions that you have. Again, we appreciate being here. We're here to talk about the Benning Technology Park TAD, which potentially would be the fourth TAD that you're being presented to consider. And as we just talked about, in tax allocation districts, to qualify an area for a TAD, you have to either be distressed or blighted, a deteriorating area, or an area with inadequate infrastructure. You need to meet one of those tests. This area meets all three of those tests. So we believe very strongly, there's no question this area qualifies under all three of the state requirements for an area. As we talked about, this would be the proposed redevelopment area, which is the area in red, and that's a more extensive area that basically would be TAD eligible. And then we're proposing right now to form tax allocation district number 4, if you choose to number it that, which would be in that blue area, and would include all the property that Tom talked about, the Benning Technology Park. That's really the economic driver of this TAD. That's the first project that would come out of the box. It's going to have the kind of benefit that you want to see in terms of jobs and economic growth. And it also includes about 100 acres to the north of properties that have been identified as either underutilized or vacant or potential sites along that interchange that's going to go at New Cassetta, which we anticipated would have the potential to redevelop. If you look at the map of the area, the TAD itself has 51 parcels. It has just short of 300 acres in it, and almost half or 2/3 of the land is currently tax exempt because the Benning property is owned by the Development Authority, I believe it is. Right now there's only 44 parcels in the area, less than 180,000 feet of buildings. Most of the buildings are 60 years old. The average value of buildings in the area is $23 a square foot. and the total taxable digest is $2.3 million. So this area has very, very low value. This represents less than 0.05% of your digest. So when we add this to Uptown, it's basically a rounding error. I mean, this is a very, very small area in terms of tax digest. And we talk about the 10% rule. You could do 100 of these before you hit the 10% criteria. What's been proposed, as Tom has outlined, is developing a industrial and business park in that property that would have several elements. Estimated build-out plan is about 1.5 million square feet of new construction would occur in that area. We estimated it would have a value of around $116 million once it was completed, probably take 10 years to build out. And based on that value, it would support a potential TAD funding of up to $14.5 million, if that was the city's desire to provide that TAD funding. If you look at the project, you're talking about an investment of about $116 million in that first, in the TAD. That would translate to about $48 million in assessed value, and you're looking at about a $14 million TAD proceeds that would go in there. So basically, for every dollar that you're investing of TAD dollars, you're getting about $8 of private investment that's going into the area. So it would represent a significant leverage of potential TAD dollars to create that additional $116 million in value. And again, the total property tax value, the market value of that area is $5 million. So we're talking about a 20-fold increase in the tax digest in this area. That's the power of TAD. If you can create those kind of projects, we're not talking about a 2 and 3% growth. We're talking about having a geometric increase in the value of this portion of the city. As Rick has outlined, there's a process that we have to go through. We have submitted the redevelopment plan to the city for its review and comment, and I would anticipate when they've completed that review that they will pass that along to you as well to review. And our hope is that we can address any issues that they have or any concerns. At this point, this is the preliminary map. This is a proposal that we're making to you at the city about how we think we can present this. It's obviously open to your discussion, comments, thoughts, amendments, changes. But we think the outline of what we have here is a very positive plan. It really puts a tax allocation district in an area of the city that, to me, as an outsider driving through and looking at the area, really needs some help. The next step in our process is we, again, have submitted the plan to the city. We're waiting on the review comments from them. We are available to meet with you or answer any questions about the plan. And as Tom mentioned, we actually at noon today are having a meeting with the school board. We had a preliminary discussion with them about it previously. We're going back and presenting this because we want to get them up to speed, just kind of the outline of what's being proposed and what the current thinking is. So we've begun that dialogue with the school board. So with that, I'll turn it over to any questions that you have.
All right. Let's see, Mayor Pro Tem. Oh, no, we've got Pops. Yeah.
The mayor answered my questions. I was concerned about the relationship of the other area, redeveloped area, and the TAD. But to your presentation, you know, I mentioned to Richard Bishop last Tuesday, a presentation like that shows the potential. My concern all along has just been the community being informed. The presentation that was presented showing the possibility explains 1,000 for what, you know, what really the citizens need to see the potential of something like that. So I'm hoping that, did you, Richard, bring, okay.
All right. Let's see. We have Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilor Davis.
Mr. Leakley, did you say that the Development Authority owns the land?
Tom, I ran that. Correct. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think it was owned by the University Foundation and then transferred to the Development Authority. Is that right? If I remember.
That's the full story is it was originally owned by the Regents, And then CSU, actually Foundation Properties, not CSU, Foundation Properties did an exchange for land they had in Harris County for this site so they could get control of it. That was when Dr. Mescon was here, and we were trying to formulate how to put that campus out there and put classrooms on it and where he could do it. And you couldn't do that where until Foundation Properties had it. We got involved in it with Dr. Mescon and CSU, and then we ultimately transferred it to the Development Authority at the beginning when we were working with Fort Benning trying to get access to the property, and collectively felt like that was the best way to use an interchange rather than having a private company doing that. So we're saying, look, that's the best way to do it. And we have an agreement with the Development Authority where we have an option to purchase back the property at the appropriate time. But basically the tax basis on it, because the Development Authority is zero, it was zero because when we first started on that, the city didn't even realize they owned it.